Good afternoon, and welcome to Arts and Design Thursdays. My name is Greg Niemeyer. I'm a professor at UC Berkeley, and I'm so thrilled to welcome today Trevor McFedries in conversation with Aria Dean. So we'll have a dialogue about Trevor McFedries' creation, Lil Miquela, who you can visit online. And I just want to thank our supporters here, most importantly, Shannon Jackson, who's with us today, who actually introduced us to Trevor McFedries, and also who runs the Arts and Design operation at UC Berkeley as the Vice Chancellor of Arts and Design. And we thank her so much for her support, and also the Division of Letters and Sciences for supporting this course, LMS 25, Visual Cultures. So moving on, I have a few event protocol things to share for anybody who hasn't been in these lectures before. So we're going to be all online, and you're going to be joining us in a kind of a passive webinar mode where we can't see you, but we can hear your comments in chat, and we certainly can hear your questions in the Q&A. It's my pleasure to introduce Hala Kadura and Edgar Fabian Frias, who are going to handle the Q&A towards the end of the session, probably around 12:45. So please queue up your questions in the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, and Hala and Edgar will guide us through the Q&A and pick your question to be answered by Aria and Trevor. Of course, we'll monitor the chat as well, so please make comments there, and if there's any questions that need to be followed up immediately, I'll try and do so. I also wanted to thank Paris Coates for organizing this lecture series and for doing all the work she does to make sure we all can come together here every week. So now I'm going to move on to introducing Trevor and Aria. So Trevor's the co-founder of Brud and the creator of Lil Miquela, but Trevor also has a long history as a DJ and musician, working on famous, beautiful songs such as Buzzin, which I really enjoy, which gives us the California lifestyle feeling when we play that track. And Aria Dean is an artist and the curator for net art and digital art at the amazing magazine Rhizome, which has shaped the development of net art since the very beginning. So we have a little more information here. Trevor McFedries is the co-founder of Brud and the creator of the first computer-generated social media influencer, Lil Miquela, in 2016. Lil Miquela amassed a large social media following in the millions and has donned brands including Chanel, Burberry, and Fendi. Though McFedries and co-creator Sarah Decour have stated that the influencer is of an ambiguous ethnic background, Lil Miquela echoes the typical Instagram look and style. Plump lips, bold eyebrows, urban aesthetic, and a wonderfully sassy attitude. And we'll see what that attitude can project into our minds. Aria Dean is an artist and assistant curator for net art, digital culture at the Rhizome. And she lives in New York. Her writing has appeared in publications including Artform, Art in America, eFlux, The New Inquiry, and other publications. She has spoken at the New Museum, the New School, Reed College, Oberlin College, UCLA, Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, and Transmedial at Berlin, a wonderful new media festival, and The Kitchen, among other institutions. I'm aware of her work as a playwright as well, with a play that she introduced in Geneva, Switzerland, and several art exhibits in Los Angeles as well. So please join me in welcoming Aria Dean and Trevor McFedries. And here's a round of applause that normally happens, but it's online, so it's a little silent. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and turn it over to Trevor and Aria. Aria and Trevor, how are you doing today? Welcome, and where are you right now in the world?
Yeah, I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Excellent. And so we are going to dive into Lil Miquela. Last week, earlier this week, we spoke a little bit about the notion of the automaton, the virtual creature that you've created. And we'd love to know a little more about how you build such a creature as Lil Miquela, and how you keep her going. What's the pipeline that makes her happen? And maybe we start there, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Sure, yeah. And Aria, Greg, thank you for making the time. I think if it's helpful, some context on what Miquela is and how she exists. By trade, I'm a software engineer who ended up making music for a long time, as Greg mentioned. And when I was I actually joined Spotify in 2010, 2011, and became quite enamored with this idea that media can be transformative. I had seen software scale and touch billions of people, and had recognized it might be an opportunity to kind of explore new types of media and new models of kind of telling stories, such that we could create characters that could have the same kind of impact like the Jeffersons might have had or Will and Grace might have had, but at the scale of Facebook. And so if helpful, I can actually share some of my screen and kind of like for folks at home.
Yes, please do.
For them to see what Miquela is and what she looks like if my Zoom wants to cooperate. And there we go. All right, let's see. Let's see if this works here. I apologize, my Zoom has been not wanting to play nice. Are you guys seeing this now at all?
We see it, yes. We see Instagram webpage. We see your entire Chrome browser there.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's easy. The Chrome browser highlights this Instagram page where you can see like this is Miquela's Instagram account. This is where a lot of the narrative unfolds. This kind of acts as home base, and the narrative started there. You can see obviously there's selfies, other characters, Miquela at Carnival. There's all kinds of interesting things that kind of like document her life, much in the same way you might have happen in a comic book, right? Like panel by panel storytelling. Miquela's TikTok, really follows a lot of the same tropes and, explores a lot of the same themes that you might see popularized on there. More recently, Miquela was like the fastest growing account on TikTok for 1 week. The YouTube obviously highlights some of her music videos, some of her vlogs, and kind of like longer, more traditional long form narrative stuff. And on Spotify, you've got all the hits. This is where the tunes are. And so collaborations with Loud have like 50 million streams, some of her singles and, artworks, EPs, and eventually an album, hopefully. And so that's kind of table stakes. I'm not sure if I answered your question directly there, but Aria, did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like something that I'd be curious to hear more about, and I think maybe everyone would just like sort of really like maybe the nuts and bolts of like the technical process of like with those posts and how like, yeah, like how she like in an embodied sense is built out, but then also, in terms of even like the captioning and like, yeah, just the process, like, the technical.
So we could get like super in the weeds, and I think I may explore some of that later in the conversation, but I think, the dream for us was to really kind of explore eventually being able to build out a platform that would enable creative people to be able to like share their ideas via vehicles that could effectively act as like heat shields or kind of intermediaries between them and like, the public discourse that can be, I guess, so difficult to navigate as a creative person. And so when we think about creating Miquela, some of our characters, they're kind of like embodying some of the ideas or some of the experiences or some of like lived experiences that we've had. And oftentimes what we do is, come together collectively as kind of a creative team and talk about, things that are happening in our world. And if there are kind of allegorical ways or more direct on the nose ways that we can engage with them. We spend a lot of time thinking about the way Marvel and maybe even X-Men, were able to discuss the Cold War and make sense of it for young people. And we think that with our characters, we're able to explore themes like identity and reality in ways that feel really accessible. And so I've often, and I really think of artificial intelligence or, technology stacks in general as kind of being these human enabling tools. And so what we try to do is say, okay, can we build out tooling that allows us to better express or better convey or touch more people with our ideas, and then sit around collectively and say, what are those ideas that we want to share? And so it's relatively, is this a great comment? Yeah, it's relatively manual.
Cool. And then like, so with her like present, I know it's like there's different, like in terms of there's like motion capture involved, right? In the
Sure.
like video stuff. And then in the still images, is it just completely like just animated, or are there, models that are used? Or?
Yeah, so there are both, right? So there are different demands. I think oftentimes when we're doing high fashion stuff, like you're going to want those fabrics to drape and to like look correctly. And so oftentimes we'll shoot a garment and then composite it. If you watch the Hard Feelings music video, that's a great example of something that is entirely done in a game engine, right? So it's a physics engine. I'm gonna like disable this chat stuff so I'm not getting distracted constantly.
But a clip of Hard Feelings, because that is quite fascinating in terms of its infinity and the whole setting on a trailer truck, and it's just fascinating.
Sure. Yeah. Let me see if my Zoom will play nice. Let's try this again. Let's see if this will work. I don't know if the audio will play through. Are you guys hearing audio? No.
have to turn on audio when you screen share.
Yeah, I didn't do that before I did it.
Do you want to redo it?
What's that?
Should we redo it maybe? Because the audio is important.
Sure, yeah, we can give people the full experience. Let's try this again.
Yeah, let's do the full experience. So go share screen, check on share computer audio, and then you'll be all set.
Yeah, we are rocking. It might need to install.
Let's see. So now something happened where we can't hear you anymore. Whoops. Now we can hear you again.
You can?
Yeah, we can hear you again.
Okay. I think it was asking me to install some drivers and kind of getting a little.
All right. You know what? Why don't you carry on? I can pull it up quickly for you. Does that work?
Yeah, if you want to pull it up. I mean, like visually, I think it communicates some of the similar things, and people can always go and probably get a better experience than like some laggy thing. Yeah, let's see. I'm not still screen sharing, am I? No. Cool.
No, you're good.
You can drop a YouTube link in there.
I can share it right now, actually. Should I do that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Sorry. Share computer sound, share.
Cool.
Okay. Wait, so are we watching it or are we not?
I guess we're watching. Yeah, it's gonna be dropping frames and stuff, but you get the idea.
You my numero uno, but we overdosed. You were there in my orbit like Pluto when we used to. You said you were home, but I just called you. Let go. People said we were fake like a photo. Didn't think it would happen with you though. I miss what we used to be. Out every night in the streets. You hanging all over me. Acting like we royalty. I wish that we could go back. Cause I feel like we're fading fast. Bracing myself for the crash. Some things just ain't meant to last. Oh honey, if it's over, let me know. Cause it ain't been easy loving you alone. Oh honey, if we're done, just let me go. I can say no hard feelings, but I'd be wrong. Got hard feelings. Got hard feelings. My heart beating, can't stop the bleeding. Hard feelings. When we met, we could never get sushi. Yeah, we were broke. Now we dress up with diamonds and Gucci. But you're trying to ghost. Always said it was never gonna change us, but we changing like clothes. Now it feels like we living like strangers, and that kind of distance can be dangerous. I miss what we used to be. Out every night in the streets. You hanging all over me. Acting like we royalty. I wish that we could go back. Cause I feel like we're fading fast. Bracing myself for the crash. Some things just ain't meant to last. Oh honey, if it's over, let me know. Cause it ain't been easy loving you alone. Oh honey, if we're done, just let me go. I can say no hard feelings, but I'd be wrong. Got hard feelings. Got hard feelings. My heart beating, can't stop the bleeding. Hard feelings. All this time I've been waiting on you. Now I know it takes two. All this time I've been fading with you. Now I know it takes two.
Thanks, Greg.
Bravo, it's beautiful.
Wow, you're a real one. You made it to the very end. Can we be friends?
That's the
But
Miquela
seriously,
audio.
subscribe and turn those notifications on.
Okay.
Like and subscribe.
I had never thought about this, but that video, there's like have you ever seen that keto sterile piece that's like how to see, oh God, what is it? It's really, the setting is very similar, and but there's like people in these like green screen suits, and it's like all about like visibility and circulation online, which is like, it's kind of funny, but it's like, what is the piece called? It's like How Not to Be Seen or something like that.
No, I've not seen that. But this is my favorite Aria moment. Yeah, where we talk about things she puts me onto like the real good culture.
Have you seen this thing that's like exactly like what you're thinking about? No, but it's interesting, and it's an interesting comparison. Well, just visually is similar, but then I think also probably like keto style in terms of her writing, I think, you know, has been probably, you know, prominent, like a primary theorist of, you know, the circulation of images and personalities after the internet in a way that I think is particular to the era of the internet that Lil Miquela exists in. And I guess like
Sure.
when we were talking about this before for this talk, like though we've, you know, spoken about this many times, but I think something that they were interested in us talking about was like authenticity and like the sort of way that she's received by people online, like by her fans, by people who are not fans, etc. And I guess could you talk a bit about like how she circulates in that respect, like, and I guess is there an anxiety around her being like real or not, and on various like layers? Or
Yeah, I suppose there probably is an anxiety. I find that anxiety primarily around like my peers. I think what's really interesting to me, and one of my favorite parts of the project, is that like, you know, I have, you know, feelings about authenticity as kind of this you know, this word that gets tossed around in like every meeting that I'm in. And like, I often, people bring authenticity, I think people are thinking of like Billie Eilish, like, you know, young woman in her bedroom with her brother making these very personal, authentic, you know, songs about her own lived experience. And then I think I often bring up like K-pop, right? And this thing that would on the surface seem like the least authentic version of the music industry. And that these are like 12-year-old kids that are kind of groomed and plucked from like Korean middle schools, and then kind of, you know, given language and how to present and dance moves and songs, and are effectively these fabricated characters in kind of like big producers' dreams. But they're kind of received as super authentic because they're not presented as being anything other than what they are, right? And so this idea that they're going to give you like incredible dance moves, incredible songs, and this kind of like this collective experience that kind of pulls you in this very theatrical way, is something that we wanted to explore as well. Like, I think Miquela in the narrative is this sentient robot, right? And that is like, you know, fantastical enough that some people especially know that Miquela's not real, but she's as real as any other celebrity they interface with via a black rectangle in their hand. And so where I get really excited is when kids use that as a mechanism to kind of weed out who's really internet native and who's not. And when I see young people in the comments being like, hey, Miquela, I saw you at the Grove today. And then, you know, boomer adults being like, no, you didn't see her there. And then be like, yeah, we did actually. And like, that's a really fun way to kind of troll people and kind of like define in a space that's hard to define, like who's with it and who's not.
yeah, I think there's definitely this generational thing where it's like, it doesn't, like, yeah, I guess something I was thinking too, like historic. I guess I was thinking a lot about like today, I was just like thinking of this, like the role of gender in that kind of conversation for an older generation, which like just, you know, goes back to this sort of like, yeah, the like woman must be like an authentic, like woman and authenticity and sort of like sort of affectively authentic like presentation of like sincere, you know, vulnerability or something like that. But the fact that I think there's also this weird like history like online of like the generalized anxiety around identity on the internet, and like, you know, the sort of like, you know, when you're on the internet, like no one knows your dog thing, and like people getting freaked out about that being so funneled then into how people deal with like women online. And so then I was thinking about like and like net art history or whatever, like recent things, like, you know, even like Amalia Ullman's like Excellence and Imperfections project like years ago,
Sure.
where like, but she's of a generation where she was like, oh, I wanted to like just like kind of make a movie on Instagram basically, but then people were like, why are you like saying you were someone you weren't? And it's like, but now I think that anyone under a certain age or who thinks a certain way, that sort of anxiety of like, did it really happen, is like not front of mind. And it's an interesting thing, just to, you know, affirm what you're saying, like an interesting shift. And then there's like awkwardness between generations online, like coexisting.
I totally agree. I mean, I think there's like in wrestling, there's that like kayfabe term where that kind of act, I think it actually comes from like carnival or like carny culture. but the idea of kind of like presenting this inauthentic thing as being authentic and genuine. And I actually think that, like, you know, I reference professional wrestling all the time because I think it's a, you know, it's a great way to understand our entire world, but especially social media. And I think, you know, one of the great kind of like hacks that we pulled together early on was that, you know, when you watch professional wrestling like WWE take place in this ring, a space traditionally reserved for like authentic or like real, you know, non-fictional sporting events, and you see someone get hit with a chair, you're forced to, like, you know, basically take a moment and pause because you've been told this thing is fictional, but you definitely just saw a dude get hit with a chair. And so, like, when we can kind of take a similar thing and say, okay, here's Instagram, this space for non-fiction storytelling where we present our lives, our authentic lives, and then present this kind of fictional narrative, people are like, wait, that's, but Miquela's standing in a photo with that real person at real Coachella. It's a similar kind of like mental hack. I think people take pause in a world where they're just doom scrolling infinitely and never taking pause. And so, like, you know, we're really interested in exploring all of those things. And I think that's been like a real strength in our org in this project.
Yeah, and then it's interesting too, because then it's like beyond the realm of like representation on social media or something, but then also it has like real, like even that article like last, whenever it was, like, she's like, you know, the highest paid like social media, and you know, whatever, I don't know what headline is. That's like, whatever. Then it had that it's like, you know, has this like real, you know, real effect or like real material, like you know, yeah, material circulation element, but it also is, again, she's like unreal in some way. And I guess it's kind of like, there's this whole thing in like Alfred Jarry's idea of like pataphysics, which like I'm misremembering in certain ways, but it's like real solutions to imaginary problems. And I think there's like something in this that's a similar, maybe it's a reversed version, but it's like, there's a, you know, an imaginary thing for like a real problem or something like that.
No, I think, I mean, all that stuff is things that, like, you know, we sit and riff on over dinner constantly, but like, you know, in the kind of like classic, you know, map territory idea, like what happens if like the map becomes more valuable than the territory? And that's like kind of this bizarre thing we're encountering where, like, yeah, wearing a new pair of shoes, like Supreme sneakers, to school is cool because you can impress 1,000 people, but putting them in this virtual space by taking an image, all of a sudden you can impress millions. And so all this value is kind of shifting to virtual space. You know, what does that mean for meat space? And what does that mean for IRL? And what does that mean for human interactions? And I think those are a lot of the themes that we explore constantly, and some of the things that we're trying to poke on and press on and try to make people think critically about. And I think that's one of my favorite parts of this project, is that we get to explore identity, reality, you know, a coming shift of value from like meat space to virtual space, and then have young people kind of be at the forefront of making decisions, because it's going to shape their lives far more than it will shape like their boomer parents, and kind of presenting in a way they can understand, like less dense language, or, you know, in story or in like allegorical ways.
So you think like then, and I have two questions, I guess. One is, do you feel like, or do you see the influence of Lil Miquela in so far as like, are there like copycat projects, and or are young people trying to, I mean, I guess it's like, there's also a barrier to entry, I suppose, like technically, or like, but maybe it inspires people to start, you know, learning how to program or something, but is there a ripple effect at all in that way?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool for me because there's this parallel, and that, like, I remember when I was 17, 18, like I knew how to use Photoshop and like Illustrator, and that was like this big differentiator for me. And then I got to be this creative person who, like, you know, prior to that probably would have been forced to use like screen printing or whatever, because I can't like draw for anything, collage or something. And like now I see a generation of young people that know how to use 3D tools, and because they can like think spatially, they're actually able to create and kind of carve out this niche where, like, I would get asked to do graphic design stuff. Now they're getting asked to create music videos for their peers, or like, you know, mock up furniture. And so yes, there absolutely are copycats. And I think like we're super flattered whenever those happen. Now there's like some major players, like some of the gaming studios, you know, Riot Games is, you know, launched one of their new like champions in a similar strategy, which is really flattering. There are like K-pop labels like SM just created a half virtual character, half like real girl group.
How is she half virtual?
Oh, pardon me. So she's not like Centaur. So like some of the women in the group, that would be sick. Wow, that's some big brain stuff that we gotta. virtual centaur thing. No, but yeah, so some of the women in the group are actual human beings, and some of them are kind of these virtual pop stars. And so there have been copycats. I personally am more inspired by like young people who are kind of like taking the software into their own hands, and like, maybe they're building NFTs, like non-fungible tokens, and selling on crypto marketplaces, but taking some of those tools and riffing what we're doing and not kind of like copying in a literal way, but saying, actually, this is how I can apply some of this thinking to like the things that I want to communicate and bring into the world.
No, totally. It's cool. This is really off topic, and maybe it's like kind of not.
We love off topic around here.
I think it's related to this. And maybe this is like from like, basically just like in terms of like, I think people talk about, I guess something like maybe AR and like VR stuff more or something, but like the spatial internet or spatial, like the spatial turn, that's like a thing that people are talking about, right?
Yeah, spatial computing.
Related, like related to this work, or is that totally outside of this world? And even if it is outside of this world, would we talk about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's super related to this work. When we first started talking about the project, like the kind of dream end state for me would be if the next major shift in computing, we went from like PC to kind of mobile, and I think the next shift will be to spatial, where either it's like a heads-up display or some other way of us having a persistent digital layer on top of our physical lives. I think I would like to see do it such that the people that are defining the experiences and the applications and the interfaces we use to navigate that space, better represent the ideas and the people that that existed in our actual meet space. And so like what we were trying to do is say, can we create some connective tissue, almost like a bridge between some of these like Web 2 platforms, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, whatever it is, and the emergent platforms, and we really hope that those emergent like metaverse platforms aren't walled gardens, that they're open, that you can kind of like come in and bring your avatar, your likeness, or whatever you want into this kind of collectively shared space. But what we think we can do is kind of like bring people into those spaces and kind of condition them or kind of help explain to them what that would look like. And, we talked about this in the past, but I always kind of think that like, the Apple drop-down menu, the kind of interfaces that we're used to exploring on our kind of like, PC or kind of like desktop life, or even like our mobile kind of square rectangle life, like that won't translate well to spatial. What we'll probably feel more like is like walking into a restaurant and interfacing with a host at a restaurant who's like, hey, welcome to the metaverse. You can take a seat here. Your menus are here. The restrooms are over here. And so we think that if you can build a relationship with some of our characters on these Web 2 platforms, and they're actually native to 3D space, then we'll be able to port that audience and that relationship into this kind of emergent platform and help define it.
It's like sending kind of like a emissary sent back to our current realm, and then they can like
what's Sarah Connor from Terminator or whatever, like that's the
so come with me. That's really interesting. I think also going back to this sort of like embodiment and authenticity thing. I mean, I hate saying authenticity, because I think that's the other question I was going to ask is like, do you think that, and I don't even think that this is the right language, but like, are we post authenticity? Because but I think that implies like an after, but there is some, like what we're talking about, I think, is that the texture of the real is such that authentic is not really an operative concept in terms of like how like information and personalities and bodies exist online. But I guess with the spatial turn, it's really interesting about like also again embodiment in that sense, and like how, is like, it's like I think we've been like kind of whittled down to being like users so intensely, and we're just like interfacing off this stuff, and then like sort of entering into a sort of 3D and like spatial like way of being online. Then suddenly does embodiment like snap back into the picture in this way where like now it's like, okay, I'm not really a user, I'm this like user entity, and that's like, I don't know, interesting. It's not really a question, but it's like
no, but there's so much cool stuff there. I mean, when you were talking at first about authenticity, it kind of got me thinking about like this grander division I'm seeing amongst young people, where I feel like there are kind of like, the trad young people that are kind of returning to like the simple life and longing for authenticity and kind of like a feeling of like, there's a lot of like, I live in the worst generation kind of sentiment on social. And then there are some people that are like, yeah, I live in the worst generation, but I'm figuring out how to turn that on its head and kind of just like leaning the fuck into it. And so authenticity is this question of like believability. And that's often how I frame it. Like from zero to believability is how I kind of would describe authenticity. There are people who are like, okay, if I live in this neoliberal hellscape and I can kind of transact on believability because that has value to brands or whatever it is, then I can kind of like, almost like in a spreadsheet, measure how much credibility and like, believability I can trade for dollars, and then kind of like build back up my like believability stack and kind of recycle that. And then there are people who are kind of like, on the flip side of that, I think, just abandoning that and saying, like, why even pretend to want to be believable or authentic? Like, I think we were talking, I've been hanging out with these TikTokers who are really big. And to me, it was like this total like mind fuck in that, like, when I was 20 years old, like, you want to be a rapper or an actor or kind of have like this thinly veiled excuse to be like really famous and really wealthy. For them, like, they want to be tech investors. They're like, why? Yeah, they're like, why have any pretense? Like, I am just going to like take capital and deploy it to founders and try to get huge returns and just be rich. And like, you talk to like a lot of tech investors and they have this like, chip on their shoulder because they're not builders, like they're not operators. And you talk to these kids, they're like, yeah, that sounds like a sucker's move. Like, why would I build stuff? I could just get rich and like hang by the pool. Right. And so, yeah, there is some like weird disconnect there where like, they're not even thinking about authenticity. You're like, what? Let's just get paid.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think I've heard about a number of like a handful of people who like, people have mentioned like, oh, that they have a student or they know someone who's a bit younger who has been like very politically engaged, but then also, or kind of like this weird thing where they're like, I can either be like super like leftist and like active politically, or maybe I'll just go be an investment banker. And it's like these things are like completely like not paradoxical in their minds in terms of like, potential paths, whatever. But also the believability thing I think is really interesting because it made me think about, also like autofiction as a genre of like literature right now, and how like autofiction is kind of the like literary manifestation of that believability, like credibility principle almost, where it's like, oh, like, let me write this book about like a thinly veiled version of my experiences that's like marketable, and then it's kind of like just trading on your like authentic but like slightly, like stylized experience versus like, and for some reason, and then honestly the same thing with contemporary art, like a lot of, in terms of the art market and even like the institutional, like, landscape, work that is believably about your existence as the artist and like expresses something that's like, coherent to the audience, like, I am a Black woman doing blah, 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 like kind of thing, like has a market value because of it. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, it's hard to untangle like the kind of identity politics thing from like this, like the value that people place on like, or I guess like it's hard to untangle the popularity or the kind of like trend of identity politics and like the kind of I guess like the reality that most people are disenfranchised from participating in like talent markets or kind of like in the employment market for a lot of different reasons. And oftentimes like when I hear tension about identity, to me it's reflective of like, that being the last remaining differentiator in like a talent marketplace or an employment marketplace, where it's like, okay, in Los Angeles, entertainment is everything. And if you're walking into a casting and they're looking for someone with like cornrows, you're like, oh, sick. And you walk in, you see a bunch of white girls, you're like, what are you doing? Like, this was like this is already. And so like, for me, you could almost imagine that like people would start to think about them in more like literal, transactable, like quantifiable, like almost like derivatives that could be traded on like secondary exchanges in the like really bleak way. But also things that we talk about, I guess, tremendously. And that's like entirely digressive, but like, yeah.
I think it's interesting too. I think like, something else with that, I think that I've thought about the identity stuff, it's like an interesting like metadata-istic sort of way. It turns life and experience into metadata that can be like, tagged and sorted and like kind of like, oh yeah, and which is also just like how neoliberalism like works.
Totally.
But then like, then there's this, then when it's, you combine that with like algorithms, a corporatized like commercial internet, where then like information and attention does mean actual dollar value in a certain way. Then you've got like this weird thing where like that data of like who you are, then can be, like you're saying, like traded in certain ways. And which is,
No, I mean, then there is like, there seems to be a situation where people are really interested in like almost, like self-labeling or like kind of like creating like the data and like the fields for people to better define where they exist and to like better understand where they exist in like different cultural hierarchies or whatever it is. And I often wonder if people are going to start, I mean, you actually do see that. Like there are young people who are like not playing the game and are abandoning any of that thinking and are thinking, okay, like I'm going to try to exist outside of any of this paradigm. So I'm really intrigued to see how when people kind of like approach that idea that, obviously if you've got metadata for every part of you, now you fit better inside of this neoliberal hellscape and it's harder to escape versus just being like this ethereal mist floating around that can't be ungovernable.
No,
temporary autonomous mist.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think it does. And then, but to bringing it back directly to Lil Miquela, I think there's interesting. I mean, I think I mentioned this to you before, I think at one point, but like the funny, or what I think a funny critique or criticism of her as a project or her as a being is that like she's stealing jobs from human models. And it's like a really interesting thing where it's like, well, one, like, I don't think that that's necessarily the case. But two, it is a thing where like, if you add this layer, and I guess is a general problem with this sort of expanded consciousness or expanded idea of humanity, and that involves like a sort of, technological cyborg kind of like whatever thing, that she then, because if she exists, then the rest of us, like all the flesh and blood people, become a sort of undifferentiated mass of just like humans. And then she's like, so then it's like we lose, maybe there's anxiety around losing the specificity of like, let's say being like a vaguely non-white like model girl on Instagram or something. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, like I really appreciate all those critiques because I just think it's like anybody who's trying to do interesting things or kind of like push things, like you need those critiques to kind of like shift over the window of thinking about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And like I've always thought that one was kind of a funny one because like there's 30 plus people that are employed by Miquela, and so like instead of like one person getting a check, like it seems like a more socialized version of what we're doing, and an opportunity to kind of employ people in this space who otherwise might not have had an opportunity to participate because they're actually great artists or stylists or 3D artists or whatever it is. But yeah, I mean, all those critiques to me are like really interesting because of how people, again, like view this marketplace of talent. They see it as zero sum. And if like Miquela is taking this job, well, it's one less job for them versus an idea of like, oh, did this create a whole new slew of opportunity for people who are, creative or have these skills or whatever it is. And, that happens with every technological shift. There's always great articles about how the bike was going to destroy townships because like women were going to ride away to the next city and leave their husbands or whatever. So
right. Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I think it's also kind of like there's also the sort of long timeline of technological shifts and like how they impact the culture, where it's like, and maybe you can speak to the larger landscape, I guess, around this for these sorts of things, but it seems like we're just at the tip of the iceberg on the sort of like artificial personality marketplace, and like the like what Lil Miquela is not something that's now like diffused into culture and an everyday problem or something that was like, oh, is that person a real person or something? It's a, we're in the like artisanal phase or something of that kind of, what I mean? I don't know. Or yeah, so maybe you can speak to the larger landscape and what the next like 20 to 30 years of this sort of thing, if you had to speculate very far out.
Yeah, I know that's 20 to 30 years is further than I usually go. Usually it's 5 to 10, but like the current landscape,
whatever. Yeah.
I kind of like exercise of doing 20 or 30 because oftentimes we get on these things and you ask me questions I haven't even considered. It's kind of fun to just like think out loud. But the current landscape, obviously there are like, the comps I had mentioned before, there are kind of like K-pop equivalents doing very similar things. There are, basically gaming companies are taking their IP and saying, okay, can that live outside of like the traditional gaming platforms that we've created and other ways to kind of like accrue value on social networks, whatever it is. There are people that are building like modeling agencies, like I think I've seen stuff like that. That's pretty literal. And then there are people like, Magic Leap is thinking about kind of like, virtual characters as personal assistant. So like, what does Siri with a digital body look like? Kind of like, very Blade Runner. Their stuff is pretty impressive. I'm not sure what's happening with Magic Leap. That's going to continue to exist, but it definitely was really impressive technology. I know like Microsoft, all these companies that are working on HoloLens or heads-up displays, they're working on avatar systems. If you go in VR chat or any of Facebook's kind of like proto-metaverse stuff, you're seeing different attempts at figuring out what the kind of avatars of the future will look like. I saw the other day that someone recreated the Four Seasons landscaping thing that Trump had, that people had like a press release, their press thing at, and then people in VR chat were in there in their furry costumes, like walking around the space, like having a conversation about it. And so I think that's going to be really interesting to me. That feels pretty immediate. People are going to be able to create these spaces and go in there and have commentary about these spaces and kind of in a VR headset or whatever. 30 years from now, I have to imagine like, all the dystopian ideas of having head-up displays that can like better define your space. I can see you, I can remember when we met, I can understand like, you know, where the Chinese collective around the corner is, all that stuff will come to pass. But I almost wonder if in 30 years, if we'll like, you know, we'll be beyond this kind of spatial shift into something else. We'll just be like full Neuralink lords, just like Matrix living in a vat, just energy powering the machines.
Yeah, it's frightening. It's like, it seems like, you know, possible. We only have 4 minutes left until Q&A.
Oh, okay.
Other stuff.
What are you working on, Aria? What's exciting you right now?
I guess I'm beginning to dabble in motion capture animation stuff for this show at Red Cat, and we're working with actual objects. So
Oh, cool.
I don't know. I mean, I guess I've been thinking about like, I think for me, the thing like my work, I think, is always kind of this like weird thing of trying to run away from like being like a centralized subject in this way, and kind of like I'm in this weird moment where it's like I've done so much stuff that's like really minimal and kind of like, you know, rejecting this sort of like expressive, like here's my, you know, experience, like whatever kind of like narrativization of artworks. And now I'm kind of like looping back around rather than like being like deconstruction oriented, kind of like with this show in January, just kind of like creating this like weird, like my own little like metaverse, like weird world kind of thing, which is cool. I don't know. I mean, like, and then otherwise, I don't know. I feel like I'm just like, I don't know what I'm working on. Like, I don't know. I guess starting to work on this book project for Rhizome that's about post-internet. And so kind of like thinking again about this like very recent history of the internet and how the last 10 years have proceeded. So that's what kind of, but yeah.
I love it. Are we supposed to do Q&A now, or do we have some more time?
I think we can go to Q&A. I feel like if we get into another topic, it's going to be like a...
I know, we haven't even gotten to crypto yet, so
like
that's good. We're behaving ourselves.
We didn't go to crypto or Jeff Koons.
Thank you so much. This was very interesting, and yes, it felt like a beautiful tour through your minds and what you're thinking about right now, what's coming next. One thing that came up in the chat, and maybe would be best asked by Eleftheria Citos herself directly, if she wants to join live, maybe, has to do with the two-way nature of the character. You mentioned that Lil Miquela could be a portal to a metaverse, but of course, Lil Miquela is always also listening, right? Because we can ask her questions, or we can make comments. And so to what degree does Lil Miquela respond to us? And to what degree does she become artificially intelligent and aware? And let me just bring in the person that asked the question 1 second. Maybe they want to specify a little bit more. Let's see. And there we go. And then we'll switch over to Edgar and Hala. Okay, Eleftheria, I think you're in.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi. Hey guys.
Nice to meet
Thank
you.
you so much for this panel. This is
Thank
awesome.
you for coming.
So I followed Lil Miquela for a while, and I'm a design student at NYU studying machine learning and AI. Thanks. So I'm actually studying right now how machines have, you know, like this certain vision. They can see differently than we can, but at the same time, they're reflecting our biases. So I'm wondering, in your eyes or in your minds, how does Miquela reflect our society, and how does Miquela see through social media? Because I feel like images are almost like a lens. So
Absolutely.
maybe I'm not saying the question correctly.
No, you're saying it wonderfully. I think there's lots of impact there. It's a really great question. I mean, so kind of like in a pretty technical sense, I'm always wary of kind of poison data sets and kind of extending the capabilities of machine learning before they're like totally ready. I'm a big believer in like technology augmenting humanity. And so, you know, there are possibilities and kind of explored ways of doing chat at scale. And, you know, if someone wants to ask, how old are you, question mark, well, Miquela's 19 forever, the narrative, that's easy to answer. I think there are ways to kind of basically, you know, do that kind of sentiment analysis, understand if the question is answerable in a really easy way, or to kind of hand it off to a human being. And so in that way, there's ways of scaling things. And I think like, those will be probably almost more of like traditional programming where they're like if-else statements more or less. And you can kind of like tree out a lot of those things. And so you can get pretty concrete responses that are reflective of like what the actual creator would want. Versus I've seen people doing things with like GPT-3 or some other tooling. It's getting very impressive where you're going to have, you can have a lot of different outcomes. Some of them probably less desirable than others. All it is to say, like, even as a project, Miquela is definitely a reflection of what's happening on social media and what's happening in culture. Like, what we've always tried to do is to present a narrative in a lot of ways that are very familiar because, creating this virtual character is kind of inherently transgressive. Like you're seeing this thing and you're like, wait, what is going on here? And then if we were to break all of the tropes surrounding that, well, then it would probably be an entirely different project. But if by presenting Miquela in the brands, the spaces, the conversations of a traditional influencer, now all of a sudden people are like familiar enough that they can like go with us on a ride. And so absolutely it's a reflection of like, a lot of our lived experience, especially in Los Angeles, which is like kind of like probably the mecca of influencer and kind of like social media culture. I could name like 4 walls in the city that are probably more trafficked than like the richest and most interesting libraries in the city. And so all that is to say, like, you're absolutely accurate, and that like this thing does kind of bounce both ways, and that oftentimes you'll see Miquela reflecting on influencer culture, and the influencers kind of like using that as a mirror to kind of explore what she's doing. And it can kind of be this feedback loop where you get things that are interesting and sometimes kind of appalling, but that's kind of the nature of this beast, I suppose.
Thank you for that. I definitely have more questions, but I don't want to take away time. It's just regarding like machine translating in language, and I guess it's
you can ask.
Should I continue?
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if you're familiar with Searle. He does a lot about deep learning, sociology, philosophy. So basically he has this experiment, it's called the Chinese room. I'm not going to get into it, but he talks about if it's possible for a human and a computer to understand in the same way that we understand. And this is kind of going way deep into AI. But do you think that human intelligence and human understanding would be the same as AI understanding? Or do you think, in what ways do you think it's different?
I mean, this is where like things are like way above my pay grade. Like I'm not the PhD, like reading my papers. I'm the guy like poorly hacking them together and then like paying the smart people to
but that's exactly the kind of question that I'm asking, is that's human understanding versus AI understanding.
Totally, yeah. And so I think like, from like the actual like theoretical implications of a lot of these like machine learning and like deep learning models, I am super noob. But, and I've always kind of been on the other side of the kind of like fear-based AI is going to destroy the world thing. Cause like, I don't know, I remember me like programming a calculator that didn't work. And you're like, what? That's like the most basic function here. Like, how come, like you run into bugs doing the simple stuff and you think, how could this stuff get there? And I think even when you dealt with like conversational chatbots in the last few years, up until GPT-3, you were like, are we going to get there in 5 years, Elon, 10 years? I don't think so. But there have been some large leaps. I don't think we're ever going to have kind of like true, kind of like human level understanding. Because to me, all of the models that I've dealt with are incredibly good at pattern matching. And so what I often see is like, computers effectively digesting tons of patterns, inferring those patterns, and then trying to like communicate them over and over and over again. And the magic of kind of human understanding to me is like what I often call like the Napoleon Dynamite moment, where like if you were to put all of the hit movies into a machine and be like, make a hit movie, they wouldn't be like this curly haired nerdy guy and his friend Pedro. Like that's not what the patterns would suggest. And so that's where they diverge for me. But again, I am the layman here.
I think that like, I mean, I'm not, obviously I'm not in any way, I don't program, but I have an interest like philosophically, I guess, in this stuff, and I've spent a lot of time on that. And I think that the thing to me, and this is not necessarily referencing anyone's particular line of thinking on this, but I do think just the sum total of stuff I've thought about, it's like, to me, the difference between them, like, yeah, I think there is this fundamental difference, but I think what I anticipate seeing, or what I think I see a lot, is that like, the human understanding or human intelligence, which is incredibly unique, is quite vulnerable and malleable. And so as AI is, as we continue to work on AI and natural language processing, all these things, I feel like we're arcing more towards, it's not that like that stuff is going to become like so much better than us, or that we're like, or that there's gonna be this divergence and it's gonna like attack us. It's more like, I think we're just vulnerable to various forms of logic. So increasingly we think more like artificial intelligence than we do like human beings. I think that even just like people who spend all their time online I begin to sort of like, again, going back to that categorization thing, there's a way in which like, we get closer and closer to like thinking binaristically and through zeros and ones, the more time we spend in this way. So I know that's my like, if I have any like fear or like forecast about it, I feel like it's just more, it's like, we're just gonna look more like, or think more like them. But
yeah, that's actually a great point.
Assimilation will become more like Miquela than we want to be, maybe.
Yeah.
Let's turn it over to questions from Hala and Edgar. So who wants to start?
Thank
I'll
you,
go first.
Aria.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question. That was a great question. And thank you so much, Trevor and Aria. That was a very inspiring just talk, and makes you think about what possibilities can you create and invent. I'm going to start with a question from our student Anshit Sadana. And the question is, how do you think the rise of virtual artists like Lil Miquela, KDA, and Yaspra relate to the 4 stages of simulacra as described by John Baudrillard? Are they the next stage in our cultural industry where we start making representations of something that does not exist at all?
Oh man, I would love Aria's take on this. I think we're like well past the 4th stage. We're on like the Baudrillard. Actually, Aria, I'm curious. Yeah, I'll jump in. Like, I'm curious what you make of it from the outsider. I've got opinions.
So the question is, how do they relate to the 4 stages of?
Yeah, or like, yeah, and are we like, representation of culture?
I think going back to what we were talking about before about the post-authenticity, or finding some way to phrase where we're at in relationship like to the real. I think that it probably is maybe not the full 4th stage where it's like, in the meme where it's like, there's no relationship to the, but I do think that we're somewhere pretty far along. And I think that actually, like, rather than thinking about it in like a sort of progressing towards a total, simulation, total simulacra, which I actually think like in some ways like that, like 4 stages, like I think that's like of course it's using Baudrillard, but it's like it's overly simplified. But I think we're somewhere, and there's this quote that's like Mark Fisher uses a lot. That's like that reality is not something that exists beyond a veil, or like there's like but it's rather like reality and fiction are like woven together, like the warp and weft of the veil itself, and so that like the veil itself is reality. And I think that is where we're at right now, and maybe there'll be like some moment of turnover where like, yeah, maybe when we hit a full spatial turn, it is just full like simulation. But I think that the key to Baudrillard is the fact that it's like, it really is that interwoven thing, and this simulacra is like letting go of, and in a way that also it connects to a much longer history of like German thought around reality. But like, yeah, I don't know. So, but it's an interesting.
Yeah, and if I were to answer that, I mean, like, I'm almost ever interested in being like stage 2, like I've always only ever wanted to be like this dot connector between like the people that I grew up in the Midwest who were kind of like, like who weren't allowed to kind of explore some of these topics in like the pure academic kind of like dense text way. And so for me, like, I've always wanted to be like, I think we're going to get to like whatever it is, like stage 4, where we have pop stars that are like nebulous flying orbs that can like, do whatever. And it doesn't even like reflect what we know to be like a pop star of the past. But like where I'm interested in saying is like, can we take, that's why like even in the music video in Unreal for Hard Feelings, like Miquela could have been flying or could have been doing whatever, but I actually was most interested in kind of having her on this flatbed that was moving at a speed that would feel reckless for like people. So people were like watching this and they're like, oh my God, that's like kind of crazy. She's dancing on this thing. And so to kind of like still connect it to our own meat space experience of like moving fast, making it feel shaky, or dancing on a moving surface or whatever it was. So I think we're pretty early in that. And I think people, like oftentimes I hear from like the VTuber set or like the real kind of like anime set that they wish it was far more, removed from like a kind of like the norms of what we know of like pop. So.
Well, it's interesting because the way you're saying gets into, physics being the thing that really, like, in terms of the nation or simulacra thing, it's like that when you're dealing, I think something with this with this show, right? Like dealing with like, especially with animated space, that the sort of keeping some sort of sense of the laws of physics, and but then like, with that video that you've stretched them just like defamiliarize it just that it becomes, which it's interesting and thinking like when you're thinking about like actual spatialization, becomes quite clear like what the elements you can work with to like take it, like thinking about like like discourse or something, and the sort of like simulacra in that respect, like, or politics. Like obviously the problem of fake news feels like one that has a lot to do with this like Baudrillard kind of thing. But then like, yeah, in a sort of discursive, like language-based realm, like let's say just the internet as it is often experienced like on social media, like, yeah, where, like, what would be the like, when you like, when's the part of the point where you drop off like on Twitter in terms of like the simulation? That's a good question.
Should we make room for one more? That was a really good question. Yeah, thank you.
Edgar, next.
Thank you. Yeah, Edgar, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been such an incredible conversation. I would love to turn it to someone in the audience. Brandon Panaligon has a really interesting question in the Q&A.
Thank you. Hey, Brandon.
Yeah, I'm looking for Brandon. There we go. Brandon, I think you're on. Brandon, if you're still with us, you can speak and unmute yourself. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I'm curious about how you guys see social ethics and morality affecting an avatar or an artificial entity like Miquela. Like, for example, could Miquela ever be considered problematic and be canceled? Or if so, or should like critiques like that go to you or whoever created it? And how could Miquela redeem herself if she got into a situation where she was canceled? How do you see that all playing out?
I would say like yes, 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 and yes. Like again, like I love wrestling as a great metaphor for what we're doing. And oftentimes you see people flip from like good guy to bad guy. And like we're very interested in those narratives. And oftentimes like we're exploring those things. And we already have, like, you know, we've taken turns with Miquela from protagonist to antagonist, and Bermuda from like antagonist to, you know, having this kind of protagonist streak. But absolutely, I think like one of the interesting things about this project is exploring those ideas of like, where does that cancellation or that animosity or whatever get directed? And oftentimes it is the symbol. Like, you know, I get feedback sometimes, but more regularly, it's like people are speaking to this body, right? Where they're like, the makers of Miquela, right? And that's like Brud. And so if they have problems, oftentimes it's directed at the body versus they have adoration, it's directed at her. And so I actually like really enjoy that as this heat show for people to like take more creative risks. And I think that like we need people to take risks. And obviously like we are hyper critical about the work that we make, and we try to put things in the world that we think are going to make this world a better place. But to have the freedom to take risks and to try things and to explore things and to try to like somewhat like invent this idea of like new trans media narrative across social platforms, it's been quite liberating and quite freeing. And so definitely a double-edged sword there, and that like it's been quite liberating and freeing, but absolutely, you know, can be problematic, and probably is, and definitely is problematic.
Thank you. That's interesting, yeah, because it allows, I mean, you could imagine, you used the word heat shield earlier, and I thought that was interesting because you could imagine someone creating entities like that for as a face for ideas that they didn't feel comfortable putting their own face toward, right? And that could get really problematic really fast.
Totally. And like, you know, anonymity, right? That's kind of like, that was my first experience on the internet. And like anonymity was really freeing for me because I could go as a young Black person into these like hacker spaces that were almost explicitly white and see people throwing around like the N-word or other kind of like really ridiculous language. And so the anonymity and the ability to kind of like express yourself have been these things that I've kind of like live in duality in my head forever, because it's like, man, this is incredible that I get to be whoever I want to be. At the same time, people are taking advantage of that and spewing really vile shit. And so one of the things we're trying to do is try to like condition the behavior that like shapes this space. And I often look at the community spaces on the internet, and you know, you can go to TikTok and you can go to Instagram and you can go to Twitter, and a lot of the same users, but the discourse feels very different because of the tones that were set by the way the community began to like behave in those spaces. And so we're trying to kind of like set a bar and trying to make things, you know, tolerant and empathetic and all the things we want to see in the internet and in the world. But again, it's been a mixed bag. We definitely had our failures as well.
I think there's also like an interesting, like in terms of like art production and that heat shield thing, it's like, what, you know, the obvious like history of, you know, avant-garde, like art collectives and things like that. But it's really an important one, I think, in that like so many of those groups were formed, yeah, for the very reason of like, oh, I can't, you know, safely or in good conscience strike out on my own and, you know, like, or like I'm not ready to step out in that way. But then, and also I don't know enough to like, you know, workshop these ideas alone and like kind of they become these like sort of like safety zones. And also I think like, you know, even with the way like the internet is right now, like so many of these groups like are only differentiated by like a slight aesthetic difference or a slight political difference, but it's really important that they are these like, you know, bodies of people working together and having those conversations. And so I think it's like a really important thing that's really great to see, I think in many different ways, as we talked about before, like coming back into play as a way to produce culture, because like there's power and safety in numbers, and it's
the collective as a heat shield. That's very interesting. I wonder if you admit AI into your collective is
Yeah, I have so many thoughts about AI. I would fill up another like hour, but like AI as this ideology. Yeah, anyways, I don't know if I should get into that.
Go for it. Go wrap it up. Bring it home.
No, I mean, like Glenn Whale has a bunch of good thoughts about that, but there's this idea that like, you know, AI to me is often like this ideology and less reflective of like pure technology. It's this idea that like, there's this thing that can run rampant and autonomously just kind of like do all the things that we used to do. And in reality, I think it's far more reflective of like tools we already understand. I think he always uses the metaphor where it's like, you know, if you were to describe AI as something that people created that can then be like used by others to create tons of value or whatever it is, like that could also describe a building, or that could describe a lot of tools that we've created in the past. It's just that we have this kind of ideology and this, you know, dystopian point of view on what they can be, such that like it makes it to be this monster, when in reality it's probably not that different. Although I think Elon would have a different opinion than me.
All right. Well, I think we're out of time now, and so I want to thank you so much for this amazing discourse that you've shared with us, and it's been super inspiring and definitely forward looking towards the future, and we very much hope that the future turns out the way you imagine it, if it's in your hands, that's a good thing. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. I'm going to drop my email and a website in here that I always talk to people about this stuff on. Welcome to send more questions. If I can be helpful in anyone's journey professionally, whatever, I try to help people as much as possible with that stuff, because it's hard out here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care. Have a good afternoon. Bye. Thank you, Aria. Thank you, Trevor. Bye.